2023 whitetail extravaganza.
There are multiple types of hunters across the community. There are trophy hunters that try for big antlers. They plant food plots, run trail cameras, and follow deer all summer long. Then there are the meat hunters that hunt for ethically taken, healthy, and wild food for their tables. I fall somewhat into that category. But there's people like me that prefer to make things harder, try and tough out elements and stack odds against them, and long for some kind of adventure. On this trip, that's exactly what I got. You'll never expect what happens next. This story starts as a few people just wanting to get back in the mountain and camp and have a good time. We're all very interested in hunting, and it's kind of what we live to do, so that's what we decided to do, was to go hike in way back in the mountain and camp on some of the national forests out in this eastern deciduous forest. Now we're in the Appalachian region. The art of hunting deep into the big mountains has kind of been lost throughout the years as people have started to slowly turn to hunting fields and food plots and things of that nature. The woodsmanship in hunting has slowly started to die out over time. We typically prefer to hunt that way, so we decided that maybe this would revive that aspect and bring it back to life in us. So we got to the mountain, picked a spot, parked the truck, and we headed out until we found a camp, set up in this beautiful spot, and we were ready to head out for an evening hunt. And you'll just have to see how this story unfolds. Brett, Brett, Brett.
Crap. Dang it. Dang it. That's a big buck. I'm going after it. Well, that was the biggest buck I've ever seen in my life. And I had him at 50 yards and didn't kill him. Gosh, man, I'm sick. I hope the GoPro picked it up. He come out in that field. He couldn't have made 50 yards. And right as I was on him, he turned and went running in that friggin' grass. That doe must have been on this side of the field. And when he heard her, he took off running across to her. And that grass was so high, I could see his head and his rack sticking up as he jumped up and hopped through the grass, and that was it. But I'm gonna be back in here tomorrow.
Alright, well, I know that was an abrupt stop. I didn't really get much footage after the whole mishap with it getting away from me because I did get a little pouty, and Jack can attest to that. We essentially walked in, set up camp, and I didn't bring any water, so I went down to go look for some water. There were some guys that were camped on out the mountain. They came by and told us where they seen water when they were scouting it in the summer. So I went down, went to go check for water, and there was none. I really hadn't hunted big timber mountains like that, and I really didn't know what to do. So I decided that we jumped 2 does on the way in, and I just decided to kind of go up in that area and walk around and look. And as I was walking up there, I only have 2 GoPro clips on the way up there, and then it's just all of a sudden I heard something running and I heard something grunting, and I just clicked the GoPro on, and it was on for about like 25 minutes whenever the whole thing was going on. And essentially what happened is the deer ran in front of me 25-30 yards, and it was so thick where I was standing I couldn't see it. And I could see a tine, but I couldn't tell how big it was. It took off. I stood there for a minute, didn't really know what to do. I decided I'm just gonna go push through his stuff and run at him and see, amidst all the chaos, they might not run off. So I take off through the brush, get through the other side of the brush, and I'm standing there, and all of a sudden, this buck just comes trotting across this big open field, and I threw the gun up, and I was too shaky. I couldn't get on the deer, and I dropped the sticks, got up against a tree, and at that point, he had turned and was trying to trotting away from me. And I really didn't know what to do. So I just kind of sat there and waited, and I figured he's going to turn broadside at some point. Well, instead of turning back broadside, I got steady on him and was tracking him, but he started to kind of quarter, and then there was another buck with the doe, and he must have got him away from him. They were on the other side of the field, and when he heard them, he just turned and ran through that tall grass, and that was pretty much it. And from that point, I pouted all night long because I didn't get a shot at that deer. I don't have much footage at all until the next morning. As the next morning came, I went and hunted, and you'll see that now.
Gosh, it's beautiful. It's beautiful if it wasn't 90-mile-an-hour winds. All right, I'm out of here. Well, this morning I eased back up here to where I seen these deer last night. I seen him up there in that field and on the other side of that field, but it's so thick you can't see. And he came down this way and I think went down on this flat, but I've been sitting here all morning and I ain't seen nothing. It's so thick up there. And if he's running her around, it just takes another accident. Because, I mean, it was pure accident that I was just happened to be standing where he'd run her within 20 yards of me in the middle of all that thick stuff. So you just kind of got to wander around and hope that another accident happens. But I got to go find water anyway, and my phone's saying there should be water down in this holler. So I might as well go look.
To really tell the whole story, you'd have to start with the backstory of actually going on the hunt. Decided to do a second week of early muzzleloading here in Virginia. And I was with my wife, and she said, I'd love to go on a hiking trip. And I said, well, let's turn it into a hiking and hunting backpacking trip. You know, we invited Steve, and he said, I'd love to do it. I've never done that type of hunting before. So I agreed to do some public land hunting, and went to a place that we have went since I was a kid. We actually been there with my grandfather where he killed a true world-class deer, no matter where you would be in the United States, especially for Virginia. And not only that, but Western Virginia. Uniquely enough, on the hike in, we locked the truck up, knew we were staying about 3 days. Seemed like that's all anybody wanted to stay. But we hiked in, got all of our gear set up. Stephen, if you've already heard, he didn't bring enough water, and made that really clear. You know, we need some water because it's pretty dry, and somewhere he missed the memo on packing water. So I was packing quite a bit of water. So was my wife Holly. And on our way in, as we were walking in, we saw several sign of rubs, a few monster scrapes, and I told him, I said, hey, they live here, and they always have, but it depends on the mass for the year, you know, for the food, whether they'll be in certain areas or not. And As we kept walking, the sign got thicker and thicker, if you want to say it like that, heavier, more presence. And I told him that I wanted to go to a specific area to camp that I always went to. At that point, we'd had a great time, and we had a little hunt that evening. We had a little time left. It was probably 1 or 2 o'clock. I can't remember exactly, somewhere in there. It was afternoon. And he said, I want to go back up there and hunt that sign. And I was like, hey, go for it. Steve went on his hunt, and my wife and I, we went on our hunt, and we didn't see anything. And sure enough, we came back to camp, and no Steven. Okay. And it was about dark. My wife wanted to get back before it was completely dark. And, 10 minutes, 15, 20, 30, 40 minutes, an hour after dark. And I was like, well, he's never been in here. And surely won't get lost because it's, pretty simple on the ridges, straight up, straight down, no big issues. And then an hour and a half went by. My wife was like, I'm worried, and he wouldn't respond on the radio. There's very little cell phone service in that area. And I was like, well, we're just going to hang out here. Don't worry about him. He'll show up eventually. And sure enough, about 2 hours after dark, we finally saw a little light starting heading her way. And she was like, oh, what a relief. And it was so funny because as soon as he walks up, the first thing out of his mouth, man, I saw the biggest deer I've ever seen in my life. He said, this thing was huge. And I was like, oh, really? And one thing to the next, it was 11:30 that night. I remember we were laying in the tent, and he was in his tent, and we were still talking. At 11:30, literally for 4 hours, we got to hear about this deer and how big it was. And he just couldn't get it. He's like, it's the biggest deer I've ever seen. And my wife was like, she'd heard enough of it, and she was like, oh, okay, sure. And then at that point, I think we finally dozed off, and next morning, well before daylight, he was gone. I heard him get up. He's like, I'm out of here. I'm going after him, blah, blah, blah. And he was gone back to his stand. And my wife said, hey, I don't want to go till I have some breakfast. And I was like, ugh, okay. Because it was a perfect early muzzleloading November morning. It was beautiful, nice little frost on. It was probably high 20s, maybe 30 degrees. It was just right. And I told her, I was like, we got to get in the woods. Or, we're in the woods, but we got to get to where we're going. And after some Mountain House meals, plug for those guys, I think we had some scrambled eggs or omelet or something. And she had her cup of coffee to wake her up. And we got on the hike. And we started out and down around the mountain. And we were concerned for Stephen because, again, he didn't have water. And he was already out. And it was just the second morning of the hunt. And we still had almost 2 full days to go. And I said, you're going to have some water. A huge drought was on. We went out the mountain. I think I was like right at 900 yards. I was like, I know there's an opening right here somewhere. But I hadn't been there in several years. And I just kept pushing. And I finally came into a little spot. And I was like, I believe this is it. And then I was like, no, just over the next little spur. It's got to be it. Sure enough, we pushed through that little bit of laurel, popped out, and it was that area that I was talking about. And it's just a beautiful area. I mean, it's just the perfect spot for a big buck, midday. And we were out there. It was roughly 8:30. And every little bit when I would stop, I would always blow a grunt call that I like to use. And then finally, when we stopped the last place, I blew the call. And when I blew the grunt call, it wasn't 30 seconds. My wife said, I can hear some coming. She could hear the deer in the leaves. And I could myself. And sure enough, about that time I heard the grunting. The buck was grunting. And you could tell it was a tending type grunt. He was really pushing hard. And I look up and I go, deer. And my wife's right beside of me. And we're in the wide open because we were pushing through. And hadn't even got to make the stand yet. And I looked up and I said, here he comes. Here he comes. Here comes a buck. Get your gun ready. Because the goal was for her to kill a nice buck. I see a horns, and I was like, there's a buck. He's coming. Get your gun up. She's got her gun up. I got my gun up. And the doe just runs within, less than 20 yards. Maybe like 15 yards. Comes straight down the ridge. Makes a hard 90-degree turn. Goes over the hill, and directly behind her is this 4-point Well, from the story from the night before, he was very adamant that there was this 4-point. You know, it's a pretty decent 4-point for a 4-point for a forkhorn. And I was like, that's the deer. And about the time that I was going to say, you know, he's probably here, this big buck he was talking about, my wife goes, there he is. and about that level, you know, of sound, of volume. And I look up, and it's straight out of the movie, right? This joker's coming down the hill. I was like, wow, this dude's huge. And he comes running straight at us. He's less than 15 yards, makes the same 90-degree turn, and it was like, I mean, it's like jackrabbits running in a field. This joker was running 30-plus miles an hour, and he clears before there was no chance at a shot. And my wife looks at me, and she's got the big eyes, and she goes, wow, that was awesome. She said, we were right in the middle of the chase. And I said, sure enough. I said, that was, but at the same time, my heart fell, because I was like, you just don't get to be in the presence of deer that size that often. And it's even a lesser chance you're in the presence of that deer that close that, you know, you could actually maybe harvest the deer.
2 days in a row.
Yeah, 2 days in a row. They go out of sight, but it was so dry, we could hear these deer working back up the mountain, running, grunting. I mean, it was a spectacle. And they go completely up the mountain and out of hearing for me. Yet my wife, she could still hear them. And she said, yeah, I can't hear them anymore. And I was like, and we were just, you know, it was so exciting to see such a great, magnificent creature. And then the mystique of, oh, he got away. You know, another great story to tell for the next 20 years to everybody. And about that time, she said, they're coming back. And I listened, I said, you hear them? She said, yeah, they're getting closer. And then the deer grunted again, and this deer's well over 100+ yards up the mountain, maybe further, and I can hear him just like we're sitting here. I mean, he's just huge, deep grunts, and I was like, that's him. And the doe comes running straight at us, and she actually stops closer than what the camera is to me right now. The does, I can actually reach out and touch her if I wanted to. I've got my gun up. My wife's got her gun up. I can actually see her gun barrel out of my peripheral vision. And the doe's just literally standing here. And she's out of breath. She's gassed. They have run her to death. Big doe, too. This was a big, mature doe. And the 4-point's right in tow. And he gets up to less than 5 yards of us. And he sees us. Not so certain he's ever saw him before, but he knew he was in trouble. He turned, and he kind of just started to slowly drift off, kind of like a turkey does when they know something's up. And immediately, the big buck comes running straight at us. He's focused on the doe. He is also focused on the 4-point because he doesn't want to lose his girlfriend. And sure enough, they meet up, and he puts the 4-point out of the way over the hill. And this buck gets up after he plows in there. And it's like, you know, like a middle linebacker that gets up after a sack on the quarterback. And I mean, he was bristled up, his hair standing up on his back. He's maybe, I think it was 12 yards in the end. And I literally look over to my right and I say, shoot him. Because this deer's looking at me quartering to. I've got a pretty good vantage of the entire deer. I said, shoot him. Little silence, and I said, shoot him. And my wife whispers back, she goes, he's behind a tree. And I just couldn't see that there was a tree between us, but I believe her. And she's like, you know, he's behind a tree. And I said, I'm trying to, you know, work this out in my mind. I'm like, how is he behind a tree? You know, maybe the angle, just like a camera angle when you're trying to work to get a deer, you know, with the shooter. And sure enough, I go, shoot the deer. And so when I whispered the second return, I said, shoot the deer. And my wife, as loving as she is, at about this volume, she goes, he's behind a tree. This buck literally focuses that 2-foot difference between the doe to us, and when he sees us, he immediately, he set back, but when he set back, he had to turn because he wanted to go the same way that the 4-point went. So when he turned, he set back into his hips to jump, and when he set back into his hips, that's when I fired. Boom. And the amazing part was it was super calm. It was that early fall morning, you know, with the frost, no wind. Smoke goes out of the old muzzleloader, and it just hangs there. And that smoke's just slowly starting to drift from left to right. And he's just standing there. My first thought was that the bullet just zipped through him, you know, got him in the ribs, didn't have time to open up, you know, all those thoughts. Harvested several deer with the gun. And I literally looked at my wife, I was like, shoot the deer, shoot him now, shoot the deer. And she's just standing there. And I guess she still had a tree between them. So I literally dropped my gun on the ground. And I'm like, I reach and take her gun. And as I'm picking it up to shoot him again, he does the death wobble and then falls over. Now, she says that I jumped probably 10 feet in the air and clicked my heels together. And I said, I don't doubt it a bit. Because when I saw the buck go down, I thought, that's a true public land monster. And to do it on the backpack hunt, the deep hunt, the pack in, the tent, and the whole 9 yards. And so immediately, ran up to him after we got the gun reloaded, and to make sure he was down. He was kicking a little bit. And so we went up, and the deer was everything that he had mentioned, and it was everything that you could dream of for that type of hunt. It's one of the best bucks I've ever killed, and it was just a perfect moment. And I grabbed the radio and was trying to call him on the radio, and it was so broken.
I was going down into a big deep pond looking for water, and I wasn't getting no reception at all.
Yeah, he had no chance at hearing me. And then we finally got a little phone service enough to text and a call, and I just texted him. I said, I got him. And he was like, bull. And I was like, oh, yeah. I said, I got him. Because I was thinking, if it ain't this one, God only knows what else is out there. He said, should I come on down there now or should I hunt a little while? And I was like, dude, I got him. I was like, you need to come see this deer. And he said, all right, I'm on my way. I finally talked him into it. He came down. I had to give a big hug to the wife because we would have probably been in that spot, but not the timing, because that's where I was headed anyway. But, gladly she wanted a cup of coffee and some fresh breakfast. And you couldn't have scripted it any better. Couldn't have been any more fun. And we had a blast.
My God. Yeah, that's a big buck. He's got about 12-inch G2s, 10-inch G2. Yeah, I guarantee you that's that buck I seen yesterday. My God.
Well, you gotta get the blood in the leaves too. Look here, it's a good blood shot right there.
That's the one, ain't it? What a trip.
Afterwards, we stood around and talked and got the buck skinned, put up, and ready to go. Walked back to camp and enjoyed the evening a little bit until I went back out for an evening hunt. As for that evening and the next day, there wasn't really much that happened, so it was time to go home. I come back to camp, we packed it up, and away we went. Walked all the way back to the truck, went and got us a nice burger, and headed home. It was nice to sleep in my own bed and not be in a sleeping bag that wasn't warm enough for the weather out there, but I'd trade anything in the world to go do it again.
Spotlight on there. I'm Willie, he's Billy, and she's Jilly.
So that's it, folks. We're almost back to the truck. As you can see, we're back on top. I'm going to the truck. I'm ready to get the pack off.
Thank you guys for watching. I guess you could say we got our adventure. Y'all keep feeling the spirit.